I'm going to talk about handling just briefly with these guys. I would hope that this is really obvious, but I just have to say it. You do not pose running breeds. You also want to handle them as little as possible. Again, I think most judges know that, but then in practice, I'm not really seeing that. You're essentially just going to check for DQs, and then after that, you're really not touching the rabbits. The only exception would be on a tan. You do need to check for the intensity and the evenness of tan factor, but nothing else. You're actually going to evaluate the chest marking on a tan while the rabbit's moving around the table like this English spot, because if you look at the chest marking when the tan's turned over, it distorts the chest. It pulls the chest back, and it makes it usually more ragged and wider than it really is. So that's a big thing. I see a lot of judges comment on a nice wide chest. They flip the rabbit back over, that chest goes back to the natural position, and it's really quite narrow. So it's really an inaccurate judging comment from the judge, but I understand why they think that it's wider because of how they're holding the animal. So yeah, again, aside from really looking at tan factor, there's nothing that you need to evaluate on these animals with them in your hands. Well, I guess for condition, for and then checking for DQs. You do not need to poke and prod the animals. Again, I would hope that that would be really obvious, but I see that. I purposefully put this rabbit out when I first started talking, just to show you how little time it really takes for them to warm up. I mean, they pretty much will start moving the table pretty quickly if it's an animal that's been well trained. Of course, if it's a young animal that doesn't have a lot of table experience, you might have some difficulties. If you do have difficulties getting the animal to run, with any running breed, this is a deep table and I have short arms, so I would normally just pick the rabbit up, move it to the other end of the table, and 9 times out of 10, that will get the animal to run. So if you're really having difficulties, if the animal gets towards the end of the table and you want it to turn around, usually you can guide it with your hand without even really having to touch the rabbit. So again, you're really just wanting to minimize how much you're holding these animals and touching them. Don't slap the table. I understand why judges do it because you see exhibitors do it. I don't know why exhibitors do it. You don't want to do anything to startle them because then they're just going to be frightened in the running. We want them to be confident. You need to be firm and confident when you're handling them. That's different from being rough. That being said, I would much rather a judge moin my tan if my tan's out of control than my rabbit jump off the table and break a leg. So you have to use your best judgment in handling these rabbits. I think as breeders we understand that sometimes you have to be a little bit more firm than you might be with other breeds. In terms of evaluation, I don't really like the term running breed because I think it confuses a lot of people because there are no points on running ability. It's just really free movement that we're concerned with. You can have an animal that moves really elegantly and be an improperly structured animal. You can have an animal that has great structure that doesn't move well. Obviously, as a breeder, it definitely helps if the animal moves elegantly and swiftly on the table. That's my goal when I'm raising my hands and I'm putting them on the show table. I want them to move well. But at the end of the day, you just have to remember that there are no points on running ability. I think that the thing that people have the most trouble with running breeds isn't that they're really challenging to understand, but unlike, let's say, a Florida White that you stick on the table, you pose it, you can take in that animal in really just a few seconds. With a running breed, you're taking in different things about the animal at different moments. You're waiting for it to move in a certain way, pose a certain way, and so it just takes more time. I would say at least double the amount of time. I always tell show officials, if you give someone 50 tans, consider that to be 100 tans. If anyone's ever seen Glenn Carr judge running breeds, in my opinion, I think he's the best in terms of, he's a very skilled judge, but he's the best probably in terms of his technique. He's very good about not just watching the animals run up and down the table, but he watches them in the holding coops. That's something judges really don't think about a lot. And he'll even put the rabbits back in the holding coops. I've seen him do that with 10 black does. So he doesn't necessarily do that just with his top 1 or 2 animals, but he'll put rabbits in the back and just stand back and watch them in the holding coops. So again, if I had to drill in one thing, it's really free movement that's important, not so much that the animals want. So some structural requirements that are common to all running breeds. They need to have good extension of both the front and hind limb. I don't see many animals that have problems with front limb. Some animals, like this rabbit right now, is much more interested in sniffing the table, so she's not showing a lot of front leg. I think if you put her in one of the holding coops like I was talking about, or you were to watch her in the judging coops in front of you, you would see her getting up off her leg more and posing and moving around. Strength in the back hog is a common problem though. You want to see plenty of daylight between the rear of the animal and the table. Strong front ankles. I think that this is something that people misunderstand too. They're not going to run on their tiptoes, that's not what I'm talking about, but you don't want them to be splayed or bowed at all of their legs. You want them to, I mean, as you can see, she is not on her tiptoes, she's definitely on her foot, but when she stands up, she does have good strength in that front leg. Parallel tracking and proper width of the hind quarter, those are two separate things, but they usually go hand in hand. She is a little bit more chopped and angular in the hind quarter, but she's a little narrow in her tracking, but she's fairly parallel. Occasionally you'll get a rabbit that's too wide, but that's not very common. Usually I think they're too narrow, if anything.
Is that something you have to see from behind?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's kind of what I was mentioning, that's what's hard about them is you can't take them all in at one moment. You have to wait and see them move in different ways. So either you would want to move to the end of the table and see the rabbit move away from you, or just stand in one place and watch as the animal moves around. But yeah, you're having to take that in really from all angles. But with cowhawks, I mean, this is the same with any breed. You can turn them over and usually see that. And then of course they're a full arched breed. So like any other breed, they need to have a high point that's not too far forward, or else they slope into the hind quarter, not too far back, and then they'll be long and flat in the shoulder. Okay, so a few breed-specific things. I'm going to talk about tans the most, and it's honestly not because I'm a tan breeder, I promise, but it's because I think that structurally they're the most different of the full arch breeds. Tans are shorter and deeper. When I describe their body type, I describe it to people as a lowercase h. So like if the top of my fingers was their ears, the bottom of my palm, their feet, they're like a lowercase h. They're short and deep. They're certainly not a petite, but they are not as long in body as an English spot, a checker giant, or a Rhinelander. And probably many people here remember a time when tans were a lot cobbier and a little bit more heavy. Unfortunately, the pendulum has swung just a little bit too much. We're starting to see tans that resemble English spots a little bit more, and even Belgian hares. They're too long in the shoulder and midsection, and they do almost have too much extension to the extent that they are not short and deep and balanced anymore. They are medium fine in bone, not medium too fine, but medium fine. And a properly structured tan shouldn't have an issue making senior weight. If you're judging tans, I would suggest weighing all of your seniors, just all of them, across the board. A lot of them do have weight issues, and that's because they're usually narrow in the hind quarter. If they're properly structured and full in the hind quarter, they should make weight though. Just one last note about tans specifically. Currently, types worth 25 and markings are worth 35. That has changed, and the next standard will be 30 and 30. So that's a decent change to our standard in terms of point distribution. Then, as I mentioned, checker giants, English spots, and Rhinelanders are longer in type. Checker giants, specifically the languages, long and well arched, fault for being short coupled in medium heavy bone. English spots fall severely for short coupled frame, medium to fine bone, and Rhinelanders fall for short coupled body, enough bone to balance the body. So tans definitely stand out in terms of their body type. It's distinct of the four. I think that checker giants, by far out of all of the breeds, have the best table presence. And I didn't really talk about that a lot, but there's a big difference between animals that are lacking table presence or confidence and animals that have structural issues. And watching them when they're in the judging coops, watching them in the holding coops in the back, that's where you can really pick up on it. I hate when judges say rabbits are running downhill, because what does that mean exactly? Is the rabbit lacking front limb, or is it just not showing off because it's a buck and it's wanting to smell the table, or it's afraid or whatever? When they're running downhill, it's usually that they're afraid. It's usually not a structural defect. And again, there are no points on running ability. So if the rabbit has the front leg, it has the front leg. I think checker giants have a lot better table presence and confidence, which is why I think they show more of an arch. I think tans probably come in next, in my opinion. I personally find, and no offense to anyone who raises them, I find English spots and Rhinelanders a little bit more lazy in their table presence. This is a really excellent rabbit. This rabbit's a little chopped in the hind quarters, and she's just now starting to kind of get it more. You see how long it took her to warm up to? That's what I said. I know that we all are pressed for time as judges, but you really do have to take a little bit more time with these animals. And if you're able to kind of keep your eye everywhere, not just on the animal in front of you, but the ones in the judging coops, the ones in the holding coops in the back, it's a lot easier to do. You just kind of have to be a little all over the place in terms of what you're looking at.
Thanks, Kelly.